In the untamed wilderness of post-Civil War Wyoming, fate is about to weave an unexpected tale. Jack Rylan, a struggling cowboy drowning in his late father's debts, never imagined that checking his wagon one cold evening would change his life forever. There, beneath a weathered tarp, lies a woman in a tattered wedding dress, Clara Belle Whitmore, visibly pregnant and fleeing from a past she refuses to return to. Over one unforgettable night of thunder, firelight, and raw confessions, these two lost souls forge a bond deeper than blood. By dawn, as Jack delivers her baby with trembling hands and a full heart, they become something neither expected, a family. But in a land where secrets rarely stay buried and the past has a way of catching up, how long can their newfound happiness last? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Rylan's weathered fingers traced the dented surface of his father's pocket watch, its golden face dulled by years of worry. 8 o'clock. He should have been home hours ago, but the creditors in town had kept him longer than expected. Their patience, like his options, was wearing thin. The wagon creaked beneath him as he guided his tired horses along the muddy trail. Storm clouds gathered overhead, promising another sleepless night of patching leaks in the barn roof. The watch ticked steadily in his palm, each second a reminder of his father's last words. "The ranch is yours now, son. Make it something to be proud of." Pride, however, was hard to come by these days. 3 years of drought had left the ranch, barely surviving, and the bank's vultures circled closer with each passing month. At 35, Jack had little to show for his years of labor except calloused hands and a ledger full of red ink. The first drops of rain began to fall as he approached the barn. Something felt different. Wrong, perhaps. Years of living alone had sharpened his instincts. The tarp covering his supplies in the wagon's bed was slightly askew, though he distinctly remembered securing it properly that morning. Setting the watch carefully in his vest pocket, Jack reached for the rifle beneath his seat. The weapon's familiar weight steadied his nerves as he climbed down from the wagon. Thunder rolled in the distance as he approached the rear of the wagon, boots squelching in the thickening mud. His free hand gripped the edge of the tarp. In one swift motion, he yanked it back, rifle raised, and found himself staring into the wide, terrified eyes of a woman in what had once been a fine white dress, now muddied and torn. She didn't scream, didn't run, just pressed one hand protectively over her swollen belly and met his gaze with a mixture of fear and fierce determination that stopped him cold. "Please," she whispered, her refined accent marking her as someone far from home. "I can explain." Jack lowered his rifle slowly, taking in the full scene before him. Her dark hair had come loose from what must have been an elegant arrangement, and despite the dirt and tears in her clothing, he could tell both dress and wearer came from money. The kind of money that didn't usually find its way into the back of a rancher's supply wagon. "Ma'am," he said carefully, aware of how his towering frame might appear threatening, "I don't know what trouble you're running from, but—" "Not trouble," she interrupted, then winced as she shifted position. "Freedom. I'm running toward freedom." Her other hand emerged from the folds of her dress, clutching a small leather purse. "I can pay you for shelter just for tonight. Please, I don't think I can travel much further." Another crack of thunder, closer now, and Jack felt the first heavy drops of rain on his neck. The sensible thing would be to take her into town, notify the sheriff. Someone had to be looking for a pregnant woman in a wedding dress. But as he reached to help her up, intending to do just that, she gasped, sharply, both hands flying to her belly. The purse fell, spilling coins into the mud. The look of panic that crossed her face struck something deep in Jack's chest, something that had been dormant since he'd watched his mother die in childbirth 20 years ago. His father's watch ticked steadily in his pocket as he made a decision that would change everything. "The house is warmer than the barn," he heard himself say, already shrugging off his coat to wrap around her shoulders. Can you walk?" The smile she gave him then, tremulous but genuine, sparked something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. The old family Bible sat open on the kitchen table between them, its leather binding cracked. With age, pages yellow and soft from generations of worried hands. Jack's mother had read from it every night, and his father had sworn his last oath upon it. Now it served as a silent witness to the strangest evening of Jack's life. "Clara Belle Whitmore," she said softly, touching the worn cover with reverent fingers. "Though I suppose I've forfeited the right to that name now." She sat wrapped in one of his mother's old quilts, her ruined wedding dress draped over a chair near the fire to dry. Jack set a steaming cup of coffee before her, strong and black, the only kind he knew how to make. "I reckon names are like promises, Miss Whitmore, only worth keeping if they're given honest." Lightning illuminated the kitchen, casting strange shadows across the walls. The storm had settled in properly now, rain drumming against the tin roof with the persistence of an unwanted memory. "My father made the promise," Clara said, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup, "to merge our family's shipping business with the Hendersons' railroad empire. I was just the collateral." Her voice caught. "Marcus Henderson is twice my age and half as human, the kind of man who sees wives and children as property to be managed." Thunder rolled overhead, and she flinched, one hand going instinctively to her belly. Jack noticed but said nothing, giving her space to continue her story. "The baby isn't his," she said quickly, reading his unspoken question. "Thomas, my first love, died in a logging accident 8 months ago. When I discovered I was with child, I knew I had to leave. Marcus Henderson would never accept another man's baby as his heir." Jack stood, moving to retrieve something from the shelf above the stove. The Bible's pages rustled in the draft from his movement. "My mother died bringing me into this world," he said, returning with a small jar of honey. "Father never remarried, said some loves don't bear replacing." He added a spoonful of honey to her coffee. "Might help settle your stomach some." Clara's eyes welled with tears at the simple kindness. "You must think me terribly foolish. Running away with no plan, no protection." "I think you're brave," Jack interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. "Foolish would have been staying, letting them build you a cage out of wedding rings and social obligations." Another contraction gripped her then, stronger than before. She gritted her teeth against it, knuckles white around the coffee cup. When it passed, she looked up to find Jack watching her with concerned eyes. "They're getting closer together," she admitted. "I had hoped to make it to my aunt in Colorado, but—" She broke off with a shaky laugh. "I don't suppose you know anything about delivering babies?" Jack's hand strayed to the Bible, touching the family records page where his mother's death was recorded in his father's stark handwriting. "Only what I've learned helping birth calves and foals," he said honestly. "But I reckon the good Lord wouldn't have led you to my wagon if he didn't think we could manage." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames. Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth, and Jack saw fear flash across her face. Not of him, but of the uncertain future bearing down on them both. "My father will come looking," she whispered. "He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully, and the Hendersons, they have money, influence, eyes everywhere." Jack stood, his decision made. He moved to stoke the fire, adding another log before turning back to her. "Let them come," he said quietly. "This may not be much of a ranch anymore, but it's still my land. Out here, a man's word is his bond, and I give you mine. You and your child will be safe here." Clara's eyes met his over the open Bible, and something passed between them, something older than words, deeper than promises. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the ghost of Jack's family memories and the solid reality of his presence, Clara felt truly safe for the first time in months. "Thank you," she said simply, and Jack nodded, understanding all she couldn't say. The Bible's pages stirred again in the draft, settling on a passage his mother had marked long ago. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Jack didn't consider himself a particularly religious man anymore, but looking at Clara in the firelight, he felt something very like faith stirring in his heart. Clara twisted the ruby ring on her finger, her mother's last gift before consumption took her a decade ago. Its deep red gleamed in the firelight like a drop of blood, a reminder of everything she'd left behind. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady drumbeat of rain, marking time as surely as her increasingly frequent contractions. "Tell me about him," Jack said quietly, returning from checking the horses in the barn. "Thomas, I mean, if you've a mind to share." She looked up, surprised by the gentle invitation in his voice. Most men she'd known would have judged her by now, condemned her choices without understanding her heart. "He worked as a foreman in my father's lumber camp," she said, smiling at the memory. "The first time I saw him, he was teaching one of the younger boys how to properly sharpen an axe. He had such patience, such kindness in his hands." She paused, touching her belly. "These same hands that now carry his child." Jack settled into the chair across from her, his own hands, rough from ranch work, wrapped around a coffee cup. The silence between them was comfortable, encouraging. Father would have never approved, of course. Thomas wasn't from our world of shipping manifests and society parties. But he understood something that my father never did, that love isn't a business transaction to be negotiated. Another contraction seized her then, and she gripped the arms of her chair until it passed. When she opened her eyes, she found Jack, watching her with quiet concern. "My mother wore this ring every day of her marriage," Clara continued, her voice steadier now. "She told me it was a reminder that true love, like the ruby's color, should be deep and unchanging. When she died, Father changed, became harder, more focused on business than family. I think he forgot what love was supposed to look like." Jack's hand moved unconsciously to his father's pocket watch. "Loss has a way of reshaping a man," he said. "After my mother died, Father threw himself into building this ranch. Borrowed more than he should have, trying to make it something grand enough to justify her sacrifice. He drew the watch out, its gold case catching the firelight, worked himself to death, trying to outrun his grief." Clara leaned forward, recognition flickering in her eyes. "That's why you stayed, isn't it? Even with the debts, this ranch is more than just land to you." "It's all I have left of them," Jack admitted. "Every fence post, every head of cattle, every creaking floorboard. It's built from their dreams, their love." He smiled ruefully. "Foolish, maybe, trying to save something that's already lost." "No," Clara said firmly, surprising them both with her vehemence. "Love is never foolish. Thomas taught me that, even knowing our time would be short, that Father would eventually discover us. Every moment we stole together was worth it." Her fingers worked the ruby ring off her hand. "That's why I ran, not just to protect our child, but to honor what love is supposed to be. Free, chosen, true." Thunder cracked overhead, and Clara gasped, doubling over. This contraction was stronger than the others, leaving her breathless. Jack was at her side in an instant, one strong hand supporting her back. "Easy now," he murmured. "Breathe through it like you've been doing." When the pain eased, Clara found herself clutching his arm, the ruby ring pressed between their hands. Neither moved to break the connection. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission costly to her pride. "Not just of the birth, but of tomorrow, and the day after. Every day they'll be looking for me, trying to drag me back to a life that would kill everything good inside me." Jack's hand tightened briefly on hers. "Then we'll face those days together," he said simply. "You and the little one, you've got a home here for as long as you want it." Clara looked up at him, seeing in his weathered face something she'd never expected to find again after Thomas's death. Understanding. Protection, maybe. Even the seeds of something more. The ruby ring slipped from her fingers, landing in Jack's palm. They both stared at it, recognizing the moment for what it was. An ending and perhaps a beginning. "Keep it safe for me?" she asked. "For the baby." A reminder that their mama chose love over duty. Jack closed his fingers carefully around the Ring, treating it with the same gentle reverence he'd shown the family Bible. "I'll keep you both safe," he promised. "Whatever comes." The old patchwork quilt told a story in every square. Jack's grandmother had sewn her life into it, one piece at a time. Wedding dress scraps, baby clothes, her husband's favorite shirt. Now it wrapped around Clara's shoulders as she paced the wooden floor, each step measured by pain. "My grandmother used to say every quilt square was a prayer," Jack said, trying to distract her as another contraction built. "Said this one here," he touched a faded blue patch, "was from the dress she wore the day she met my grandfather." Clara gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. "Tell me," she gasped. "Tell me more about them, please. I need something to focus on besides—" She broke off, breathing hard. Jack moved closer, ready to steady her if needed. They homesteaded this land when it was nothing but wild prairie. Grandmother was barely 17, fresh from Boston. Everyone said she was crazy to follow a rancher's dream out here. He smiled at the memory. She said love made fools of us all, but the best kind of fools. The contraction peaked, and Clara swayed. Jack's hands found her elbows, supporting without confining. When she could speak again, her voice was tight with fear. "They're too close together now. Something's wrong, it's too early." "Babies come when they want to," Jack said with a calm he didn't feel. "My grandmother delivered half the children in the county, said every birth had its own time, its own way." Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by thunder that rattled the windows. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had intensified. Clara jerked at the sound, then gasped as her waters broke. "Jack!" Her voice held raw panic now. "I can't do this, not here, not like this. I need a doctor, I need—" "Look at me," Jack said firmly, turning her to face him. "You're not alone. I know I'm not who you would have chosen for this, but I swear, on everything I hold sacred, I will see you and your child through this night." She searched his face, finding nothing but steady resolve. Another contraction gripped her, and she clutched at his shirt, burying her face against his chest. Jack held her through it, one hand rubbing circles on her back, like he'd seen his father do for spooked horses. "The quilt," he continued when she could listen again. "Each square has a story, but together they make something stronger. Something that keeps you warm when the night's coldest." He wrapped it more securely around her shoulders. "Kind of like family." Clara laughed weakly. "Is that what we are? Family?" "We're whatever you need us to be," Jack said simply. "For as long as you need it." Another pain took her, harder than before. When it passed, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens, if I don't—" She swallowed hard. "Promise you'll take care of my baby. Don't let them find—" "Stop right there," Jack interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing's going to happen to you. You hear me? You're stronger than you know, Clara Belle Whitmore, and that little one needs their mama." She started to respond, but her words transformed into a cry of pain. This contraction didn't ease like the others, and real fear flickered in her eyes. "The baby's coming," she whispered. "Jack, the baby's coming now." He acted quickly, lifting her as gently as he could and carrying her to his parents' old bed. The quilt wrapped around them both, a witness to yet another chapter in its long history. "Of family moments. Hold on to me," he said, helping her find a position that seemed to ease her pain. "Just like that. You're doing fine." Clara gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Tell me another story," she begged. "About your grandmother, about the quilt, anything." So Jack talked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. He told her about the yellow square from his mother's Sunday dress, about the red patch from his first shirt, about the white silk from his parents' wedding. He wove a tapestry of family history around her, watching her focus on his words through each pain. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that room, wrapped in a quilt, made of memories, and held together by newfound trust, something remarkable was about to happen. Between contractions, Clara's trembling fingers found the crumpled letter in her dress pocket. Her father's precise handwriting stood stark against the fine paper, each word a blade. Your marriage to Marcus Henderson will proceed as arranged. This alliance is not a matter for debate. Your recent indiscretion changes nothing. The child will be raised as a Henderson, and you will perform your duties as befits our family's station. I trust I make myself clear. Here, Jack said, returning with fresh water and clean linens. He paused when he saw the letter. Sometimes words hurt worse than any physical pain. Clara let out a bitter laugh that transformed into a groan as another contraction built. He wrote this when I told him about the baby. She managed through clenched teeth, didn't even look at me, just pushed the paper across his desk like a business contract. Jack took her hand, letting her squeeze as the pain peaked. In the flickering lamplight, sweat gleamed on her forehead, her dark hair wild around her face. My father was different, he said, when her grip eased. Talked too much, felt too deeply. The bank manager used to say he'd have been richer if he'd thought more with his head than his heart. He smiled sadly. Course, that same banker's been trying to foreclose on us since the day after we buried him. Another contraction came faster than expected, and Clara cried out. Jack supported her through it, his strong hands steady on her back. Tell me, she gasped when she could speak again. Tell me about your father. Help me focus on something besides the pain. Jack reached for a cloth, gently wiping her face. He loved to sing, he said softly. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but that never stopped him. Used to wake me up every morning with some horrible rendition of "Oh, what a beautiful morning." Drove my mother crazy, but she'd smile every time. Clara's lips curved despite her exhaustion. Thomas used to sing too, old folk songs his grandmother taught him. Her voice caught. He should be here. He should be the one. I know, Jack said simply, and something in his tone told her he truly did understand. Life ain't always fair with its timing. I was going to tell him that day, she whispered, about the baby. He was so excited about the new lumber contract, said it would finally give us enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Her fingers crumpled the letter. Instead, I had to watch them lower him into the ground, our child growing beneath my heart, and my father arranging my marriage to a man who treats his horses better than his servants. The contraction that seized her then was the strongest yet. When it finally released its grip, she was shaking. Jack? Real fear colored her voice. I don't think I can do this. He shifted to sit behind her, letting her lean back against his chest. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You're the woman who walked away from a life of luxury, who chose freedom over security, who trusted a stranger because your heart told you it was right. This, he touched her belly gently, this is just one more brave thing. Clara's hand found his, clinging as another pain began building. I never told anyone, she managed between careful breaths, but Thomas and I, we were married. In secret, a tiny church. Outside the logging camp, no witnesses except the preacher and God. She pulled a thin gold chain from beneath her chemise, a simple ring hanging from it. He said he didn't care if it wasn't legal in society's eyes. It was real, in the ways that mattered. Jack's heart clenched at the revelation. That's why you ran, not just from Henderson, but for your child's legitimacy. My father would have destroyed the records, claimed Thomas took advantage, ruined me. Her words dissolved into a cry as the strongest contraction yet took hold. Your baby will know the truth, Jack promised, supporting her. Through the pain, we'll know they come from love, not duty, that their father was a good man who married their mother proper, and their mother was the strongest woman I've ever met. Clara turned her head into his shoulder, tears mixing with sweat. Why are you being so kind to me? Jack was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because kindness shouldn't be rare enough to question. Because my father would have done the same. Because he broke off as she tensed again. Because sometimes God puts people in our path for a reason, and it ain't our job to question his timing. The letter slipped from Clara's fingers as another contraction gripped her, falling to the floor beside the bed. In the lamplight, her father's stern words blurred and faded, lost beneath the stronger truth of the moment. Sometimes family was less about blood and breeding, and more about who held you through your darkest hours. Jack's mother's locket lay, open on the bedside table, its tarnished silver catching the first grey light of dawn. Inside, a tiny painted portrait of a woman with his eyes smiled out at the world. A woman who had given her life, bringing him into the world. He'd never thought to understand his father's grief more clearly than he did in this moment, watching Clara fight for her child's life. "One more," he encouraged, his voice hoarse from the long night. "The baby's almost here, Clara. One more push." She was beyond words now, her entire world narrowed to this primal struggle. Her hand found the locket, clutching it like a lifeline as she bore down one final time. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound silence, broken only by Clara's labored breathing, and then, suddenly, gloriously, a new sound filled the room. The lusty cry of a healthy baby. "A girl," Jack announced, his hands trembling as he wrapped the tiny form in a soft blanket. "Clara, you have a daughter." Clara's sob was pure joy as Jack laid the baby on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching the damp, dark curls that already promised to match Thomas's. "Oh, look at you, perfect. So perfect." Jack moved to give them privacy, but Clara's hand shot out, catching his wrist. "Stay," she said, softly. "Please, you're part of this too." He settled carefully on the edge of the bed, watching in wonder as the newborn nuzzled against her mother's heart. The first light of dawn painted them in soft gold, mother and child wrapped in his grandmother's quilt, their new life beginning as the storm clouds parted. "I want to name her Hope," Clara said suddenly, looking up at him with tired eyes that somehow shone brighter than he'd ever seen them. "Hope Thomas Whitmore." She touched the locket still clutched in her hand. "For your mother, who gave you the strength to help us. For Thomas, who gave her life. And for you, Jack Rylan, who gave us both a future." Jack's throat tightened. "Clara—" "Let me finish," she interrupted gently. "All my life I've lived in gilded cages. Even with Thomas, we had to hide our love like it was something shameful. But here, in this humble room, with a man who opened his home to strangers," she smiled down at her daughter, "here, I finally understand what freedom truly means. Baby." Hope chose that moment to open her eyes. Thomas's eyes, Jack noted, and let out a demanding cry. Clara laughed softly, adjusting her position. "She knows what she wants," Jack observed, helping Clara settle more comfortably against the pillows. "Strong-willed like her mama, and kind," Clara added, watching him tuck the quilt more securely around them both, "like her guardian angel." The word hung between them, full of meaning. Jack touched the locket, thinking of his own mother, of all the twists of fate that had led to this moment. "I meant what I said before," he said quietly. "You both have a home here, for as long as you want it. I know it's not much." "It's everything," Clara interrupted. "It's safety. It's peace." She looked around the room at the worn furniture and faded curtains, seeing not poverty, but possibility. "It's a place where hope can grow. Up free, knowing she comes from love." Dawn had fully broken now, streaming through the windows in bands of gold. Outside, they could hear the first bird song, the world awakening to a new day. "Will you tell her about him?" Jack asked softly. "About Thomas?" "Every day," Clara promised, touching Hope's tiny hand. "About how brave he was, how kind, how he loved her before he even knew she existed." She paused, then added quietly, "And I'll tell her about you, Jack, about the night a stranger became family." Jack picked up the locket, its silver warm from Clara's grip. Inside, beside his mother's portrait, was a tiny space, empty until now. "Maybe," he said carefully, "we could put her picture in here, Hope's first portrait, next to her guardian, grandmother." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." As if in agreement, Hope made a contented sound, her tiny fingers wrapping around one of Jack's rough ones. In that moment, watching the sun rise on his mother's locket, and this new little Family, Jack felt something settle in his heart, something that felt remarkably like coming home. The deed to the Rylan ranch lay spread across the kitchen table, its official seal faded but still visible in the morning light. Jack studied the familiar signatures, his father's bold scrawl, his mother's delicate script, while Clara sat nearby, in his mother's old rocking chair, nursing hope as naturally as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. 300 acres, he said quietly, tracing the property lines with one weathered finger, was a kingdom when father first bought it. Now it's mostly mortgaged memories. He looked up to find Clara watching him intently. But it's still home. Tell me about it, she said, adjusting Hope against her shoulder with the ease of newfound motherhood. Help me see it through your eyes. Jack stood, moving to the window where the rising sun painted the landscape in shades of promise. That meadow there where the wildflowers grow? Mother planted those seeds our first spring here, said every ranch wife needed a bit of beauty to balance all the practical. He smiled at the memory. The creek that runs along the south border? Father taught me to fish there when I was barely tall enough to hold the rod. Clara rose carefully. Hope cradled close and joined him at the window. And now? Now? Jack sighed. The bank holds most of it. Drought hit hard these past few years. Cattle prices fell. Father borrowed against the land to keep us afloat. Then he gestured to the deed. Left me to figure out how to keep his dream alive. Dreams change, Clara said softly, touching his arm. Sometimes they have to survive. Hope made a small sound, and Jack found himself reaching out instinctively to stroke her downy head. Father always said land was the only thing worth having because they weren't making any more of it. He paused, watching the baby's tiny fingers curl around his rough one. But standing here now, I'm thinking maybe he was wrong about that. Clara's eyes met his, understanding flowing between them. How long? She asked. Before the bank. 6 months, maybe less. Jack turned back to the deed. Unless we can miracle up $3,000. I have money, Clara said quickly. My mother's trust fund. No, Jack interrupted gently. The moment you access that account, they'll know where you are. I won't risk your freedom or hopes for my father's debt. Clara shifted the baby to her other shoulder, her face set with familiar determination. Then we'll find another way. This land, this home, it's not just yours anymore, Jack. You've given us shelter, safety, family. Let me help. Before Jack could respond, Hope began to fuss in earnest. He watched in amazement as Clara instinctively swayed, humming a soft lullaby that somehow perfectly matched the rhythm of his mother's old rocking chair. You're good at that, he said softly. Natural. It's strange, Clara replied, smiling down at her daughter. Everything I was taught. Deportment, classical, piano, proper etiquette, none of it prepared me for this. But somehow, holding her, caring for her, it's like my body remembers something my mind never learned. Jack folded the deed carefully, returning it to its place of honor in his father's desk. Kind of like love itself, he said. Not something you learn from books or fancy schooling, just something that grows if you give it room. The morning sun streamed through the windows now, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Hope had drifted off to sleep, one tiny hand curled against her mother's heart. What do we do now? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack moved to stand beside them, his presence solid and reassuring. We take it one day at a time. Get you and Hope settled. Figure out how to make this work. He smiled slightly. Maybe teach you how to milk a cow. Clara's laugh was quiet but genuine. I'd like that, to learn useful things, real things. She looked around the kitchen, at the worn but well-loved furniture, the herbs drying in the window, the deed that represented both burden and blessing. To build something true. Then that's what we'll do, Jack said simply. Together. Outside, the ranch was awakening, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the day's work calling. But for this moment, in this kitchen filled with morning light and new possibilities, 3 people who had been alone found themselves becoming something else entirely, a family. The Wyoming Weekly Herald's headlines screamed from the general store's window. Shipping heiress missing, substantial reward offered. Below the bold type, Clara's portrait stared out at the world, her society smile frozen in time. Nothing like the warm, genuine expression Jack had come to know. "Best make this quick," he muttered, tightening his grip on the wagon's reins. It had been 3 days since Hope's birth, and they'd run out of essential supplies. "Keep that shawl close." Clara huddled deeper into his mother's old shawl. Hope, sleeping peacefully against her chest in a sling Jack had fashioned from soft flannel. "They won't expect to find me here," she whispered, "looking like this." She was right. The elegant young woman in the newspaper photo bore little resemblance to the simply dressed mother sitting beside him. Still, Jack's heart hammered as they pulled up to the store. Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, peered at them curiously as they entered. Jack Rylan twice in 1 week must be a record. Her eyes fixed on Clara and the baby. And who might this be? "My cousin Mary," Jack said smoothly, the practiced lie feeling bitter on his tongue. "From back east, lost her husband recently, needed a fresh start." Mrs. Peterson's eyes softened with sympathy, but there was speculation in them too. Terrible thing, losing a spouse so young. "She'll be staying with you then, long as she needs." Jack's tone discouraged further questions as he began gathering supplies. Sugar, coffee, milk, basic medical supplies that Clara had suggested for Hope. "Did you see this?" Mrs. Peterson gestured to the newspaper on her counter. "Such a scandal. That poor Henderson fellow left at the altar by a girl carrying another man's child. And her father, Whitmore himself, offering $5,000 for information." She shook her head. "Makes you wonder what the world's coming to." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she examined a display of baby clothes, but her voice was steady. "Sounds like the girl had her reasons." "Reasons," Mrs. Peterson scoffed. "In my day we understood duty, family obligations. Why, my own marriage was arranged by..." The store's bell jingled as Thomas Murphy, the telegraph operator, burst in. "Mrs. Peterson, news from Cheyenne!" He waved a yellow paper excitedly. "The Hendersons have hired Pinkerton detectives to search. For the Whitmore girl. They're checking every town, every..." He stopped short, noticing Jack and Clara. Jack stepped deliberately between Clara and the newcomer. "We'll take these items, Mrs. Peterson. Need to get my cousin and the little one back before the weather turns." But Murphy was staring at Clara, his eyes narrowing. "Say, don't I know..." "You might know my late husband," Clara interrupted, her voice taking on a slight Irish lilt. "He worked the lumber camps up north before the fever took him." The accent threw Murphy off balance. "I suppose not, then." "Begging your pardon, ma'am," Jack paid quickly, helping Clara into the wagon while balancing their purchases. Hope stirred but didn't wake, secure in her mother's embrace. As they drove home, Clara's feigned accent faded into shaky breathing. $5,000, she whispered, in a territory where most men don't see that much in a lifetime. "Good thing we're surrounded by people of principle, then," Jack said. But his grip on the reins was tight. "Jack," Clara's voice was small. "I won't let them take her. I'll run again if I have to." He turned to her, seeing the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. "No one's running anywhere. This is your home now, Hope's home. But the Pinkertons, let them come," Jack said quietly. "They're looking for an heiress in fine clothes, not a rancher's cousin in homespun with a baby in calloused hands." He managed a smile. "Besides, you've got something they don't." "What's that?" "A whole town full of people who hate the railroad companies even more than they love money. Henderson's not exactly popular in these parts, buying up failed ranches. For his railways." Clara digested this, hope warring with worry on her face. "And if someone does recognize me..." Jack's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Then they'll have to go through me first. And I reckon Mrs. Peterson might surprise you too. She lost her own daughter to a loveless marriage years back. Never forgave herself for arranging it." The newspaper lay forgotten in the wagon bed behind them, Clara's society portrait already, fading in the bright Wyoming sun. Ahead, the ranch rose against the horizon like a promise, not of wealth or status, but of something far more precious, the chance to write their own story, on their own terms. The soft scrape of sandpaper against wood filled the evening air as Jack worked on the cradle by lamplight. His father's old woodworking tools lay spread across the kitchen table, each stroke revealing the natural beauty of the pine boards he'd been saving for something special. Clara sat nearby in the rocking chair, humming softly to Hope while she watched his hands shape their daughter's first real bed. "My grandfather made this pattern," Jack explained, his fingers tracing the half-finished design of intertwined wildflowers. "Said every cradle needs something of the land it springs from, something to root the child to home." "It's beautiful," Clara murmured, shifting Hope to her shoulder. 2 weeks had transformed her from society lady to mother with remarkable grace. Her hands, though still soft, now moved with quiet confidence through the daily rhythms of ranch life. "I never knew you were an artist," Jack chuckled, blowing sawdust from a freshly carved petal. "Rancher, midwife, furniture maker, I'm just full of surprises." "That you are, Jack Rylan." Her voice held a warmth that made him look up, catching her gaze in the lamplight. Something unspoken passed between them, comfortable as a well-worn quilt. Hope's soft cooing broke the moment. Clara returned her attention to their daughter, but a slight blush colored her cheeks. "Tell me about your grandfather, the one who carved cradles." "He was a dreamer," Jack said, returning to his work. "Came west with nothing but his tools and a head full of ideas. Built this house room by room, board by board." He smiled at a memory. "Grandmother used to say he carved love into every piece of furniture he made, so the house would always feel like home." "Is that why everything here feels so alive?" Clara ran her hand along the arm of the rocking chair. "Like each piece has a story?" "Maybe." Jack held up a thin curl of wood to the light. "Or maybe you just understand the language of handmade. Things. The value of something crafted with care instead of bought with money." Clara's expression turned thoughtful. "I never knew there was a difference before. Everything in my father's house was expensive, perfect, and cold." She touched one of the half-carved flowers. "This is warm, like it's growing right out of the wood." "Speaking of growing," Jack said, setting down his tools, "how are you feeling about tomorrow? First time helping with the morning milking." "Nervous," Clara admitted with a small laugh, "but excited too. Though I'm not sure Bessie trusts me yet." "That old cow? She's just playing hard to get. You should have seen her when Father first brought her home. Wouldn't let anyone near her for weeks." He began gathering his tools, arranging them with careful precision. "Now she's the gentlest milk cow in the county. Like someone else I know," Clara said softly. "Careful and kind, once you earn their trust." Jack stilled, something in her tone making his heart beat faster. Before he could respond, Hope began to fuss in earnest. "Hungry again?" Clara said, rising. "She has quite the appetite for such a tiny thing. Strong, like her mama." Jack stood, too moving to build up the fire. The nights were getting cooler, autumn painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Clara settled back into the rocking chair, adjusting her shawl for privacy as Hope nursed. The domestic intimacy of the moment caught Jack off guard. This scene could have been from any evening of his parents' marriage. Love made visible in small, ordinary moments. "I've been thinking," Clara said after a while, her voice hesitant, "about what Mrs. Peterson said, about Henderson buying up failed ranches for his railroad." Jack's hands tightened on the cradle's edge. "Clara, hear me out." She shifted Hope gently. "The railroad's coming whether people like it or not. But what if instead of fighting it, we found a way to work with it? Work with Henderson?" Jack's voice held disbelief. "Not with him specifically. But the railroad will need lumber for ties, beef to feed their workers." Her eyes shone with growing excitement. "What if we could contract directly with the railway company, under a different name, of course? Your cousin Mary's husband's family, perhaps, with you as the local representative?" Jack sat back, considering. "It's risky." "Life is risky," Clara countered. "But you know ranching and I know business, how contracts work, how to negotiate terms." She smiled slightly. "Father did insist I learn that much at least." Hope had drifted off to sleep, one tiny hand curled against her mother's. "Heart," Jack looked at them both, then at the cradle taking shape beneath his hands. Every flower he carved was a promise of protection, of provision, of a future worth building. "We'll need to be careful," he said finally. "Smart. We will be." Clara's free hand found his across the cradle's rim. Together, the lamplight caught the fresh carved flowers, making them seem to dance along the wood grain. Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the darkened prairie, a reminder that even in the wild, no one was meant to face the night alone. The wanted poster fluttered against the general store's board, Clara's formal portrait now accompanied by a more recent description. Maybe traveling with infant, possibly seeking shelter in rural areas. Approach with caution, subject's mental state uncertain. The reward had doubled to $10,000. Sheriff Davies handed the poster to Jack with grave eyes. "Thought you should see this yourself. Jack, Pinkerton men were asking questions at the saloon last night about your cousin Mary." Jack's fingers crumpled the paper's edge. 1 month of peace had softened them, made them careless. Just yesterday, Clara had laughed in the garden, dirt smudging her cheek as she learned to plant winter vegetables. Hope had begun smiling. Real smiles, not just infant reflexes, her eyes crinkling just like her mother's. "Who talked?" Jack asked quietly. "Nobody yet." Davies shifted his weight, badge catching the morning sun. "Murphy's been studying that newspaper picture mighty hard, though. And there's talk about how gentle your cousin's hands are, how fine her speech is when she forgets to play rough." Jack's jaw tightened. "She's family, John. That's all anyone needs to know." "Is she?" The sheriff's voice was kind but firm. "Because if she's who I think she is, there's laws about harboring. She's my wife." The words surprised them both. Jack hadn't planned them, but they felt right, solid as the ground beneath his boots. Davies studied him for a long moment. "That changes things. When did you marry?" "Small ceremony back east." The lie came easier now, wrapped in his growing need to protect them. "Before Thomas, her first husband, died. We kept it quiet, with the baby coming and all the complications. And you're sticking to that story?" "It's not a story." Jack met his old friend's eyes steadily. "She's my wife, Hope's my daughter, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." The sheriff sighed, then reached into his vest. Jack tensed, but Davies merely pulled out a folded paper. "Telegram came this morning. Thought you should see this too." Jack opened it with unsteady hands. "Stop. Information received regarding CBW whereabouts. Stop agents en route from Cheyenne. Stop Henderson accompanying personally. Stop Whitmore family offering additional compensation for discreet handling." "Stop how long?" Jack asked. "Train arrives tomorrow noon." Davies took back the telegram. "I've known you since we were boys, Jack. Known your family longer. Whatever's going on here." He paused. "Just tell me you're sure about this." Jack thought of Clara that morning, Hope cradled in one arm while she helped him mend tack with her free hand. Thought of how naturally she fit into the ranch's rhythms, how her presence had transformed his father's house back into a home. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Davies nodded slowly. "Then you'd best get home. Warn her, and—" "Jack!" He gripped Jack's shoulder. "If anybody asks, I haven't seen you today." The ride home was a blur. Jack found Clara in the kitchen, teaching herself to make bread, while Hope napped in her new cradle. The domestic scene hit him like a physical blow, everything he stood to lose captured in one perfect moment. "Jack!" Clara straightened. Flour, dusting her apron. "What's wrong?" He handed her the wanted poster wordlessly, watched her face pale as she read it. $10,000, she whispered. "And they're calling me." Her hand trembled. "They're making me sound unstable. Like I'm not fit to be a mother. They're coming, Clara, Henderson himself, tomorrow." The mixing bowl slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a crash that made Hope stir. Clara moved instinctively to soothe their daughter, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "How did they find us?" "Does it matter?" Jack began pacing. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Maybe up to the line shack in the high pasture, or no. Clara's voice was firm. No more running. Clara, I mean it. She lifted Hope from the cradle, holding her close. This is our home, Hope's home. I won't let them drive us out of it. They'll try to take her. Jack's voice cracked. They'll say you're unfit. Claim Henderson has rights as you're intended. Let them try. Clara's chin lifted with familiar determination. I have something they don't. What's that? She smiled, though tears gleamed in her eyes. A husband who'll stand with me? That is, her voice softened, if you meant what you told the sheriff. Jack crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, gathering them both in his arms. With everything I am, he whispered against her hair. Everything. I have. Hope cooed between them, oblivious to the gathering storm. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, nature itself echoing the approaching confrontation. Reverend Miller's hands shook slightly as he filled out the marriage license, the scratching of his pen loud in the empty church. Dawn light filtered through stained glass, painting the document in hues of rose and gold as he recorded the date, backdated. 6 months, God forgive him, and the names, Jack Thomas Rylan and Clara Belle Whitmore. You understand what you're risking? He asked, looking up at Jack. Both of you? Clara stood close to Jack, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. She'd changed into her best dress, one of Jack's mother's, carefully altered, and though her hands trembled, her voice was steady. We understand the sin of bearing false witness, Reverend. But isn't there a greater sin in allowing an innocent child to be torn from her mother's arms? The old minister's face softened. He'd baptized Jack, buried his parents, watched him shoulder his father's debts with quiet dignity, and he'd seen the change in the young rancher these past weeks, the new light in his eyes, the way he looked at Clara like she was the answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Reverend Miller said finally, sanding the ink. Sometimes the truest path isn't the straightest one. He held up the license, now official with his signature and seal. By my reckoning, you two were married. Here last spring, just after sunset on a Wednesday evening. A small private ceremony witnessed by myself and Mrs. Miller, God rest her soul. Jack's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently. Thank you, Reverend. We won't forget this. See that you don't. The minister's eyes crinkled. Now, since you're here, might as well make it official before God as well. No sense having only earthly. Paperwork. Clara's breath caught. You mean a real ceremony, the Reverend confirmed. Quick and quiet, but proper. In case anyone comes asking questions, I'd rather not have to lie about everything. Jack turned to Clara, his eyes questioning. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned beyond getting the backdated license. But standing here in the morning, light, hope cradled between them, it felt right, felt true. Clara Belle Whitmore, he said softly, taking both her hands in his. I know this started as protection, as shelter from a storm, but somewhere along the way, he swallowed hard, somewhere between that first night and this morning, you and Hope became my whole world, my home. So I'm asking you now, proper and true, will you marry me? Not just on paper, but in your heart. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, with all that I am. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by dust motes dancing in the colored light and Hope's quiet breathing. But when Jack kissed his bride, there was nothing false about the love shining in their eyes. The license is ironclad, Reverend Miller said afterward, handing it to Jack. Registered with the county clerk last night. Your marriage predates any claim Henderson might make, and with Hope legally acknowledged as your daughter, he smiled. Well, let's just say even Pinkerton agents have to respect the sanctity of family. Speaking of which, Clara said, adjusting Hope's blanket, we should get back. They'll be arriving soon. Jack tucked the license carefully into his vest pocket next to his father's watch. Reverend, if anyone asks, I'll tell them the truth, the old minister interrupted, that I married you and Clara last spring, that I've watched you build a life together, that Hope is the spitting image of her father. His eyes twinkled, though whether I mean you or Thomas is between me and the Lord. Outside, the morning had bloomed bright and clear. Jack helped Clara into the wagon, handling her like something precious, which, he realized, she was. They both were, she and Hope, his family, now in truth as well as intent. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked as they drove home, Hope sleeping against her chest. Jack smiled, remembering their first ride together, her huddled and afraid in his wagon. "Thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come unexpected, like finding an angel in my supply wagon." "Angel," Clara laughed softly. "I was a mess that night. Terrified, desperate, beautiful," Jack corrected. "Brave. Everything I didn't know I was waiting for." Clara leaned against his shoulder, fitting there like she was made for it. "Do you think it will work? The license, the marriage?" "It has to." Jack's voice held quiet conviction. "Because this, what we have, it's more real than any paper Henderson can wave around, more true than any society marriage could ever be." The ranch appeared on the horizon, their home rising from the prairie like a promise. Soon they would face Henderson, face Clara's father, face whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, they were simply a family driving home together, their future sealed in ink and sworn before God, their love as real as the morning sun warming their faces, the sharp tap of Jonathan Whitmore's silver-headed cane against. The ranch house's wooden floor marked each word like a judge's gavel. Clara stood her ground in the kitchen. Hope held close, while Jack leaned against the doorframe, every muscle tense, but his posture deliberately casual. "This charade has gone on long enough, Clara Belle." Her father's voice carried the same authoritative tone that had commanded shipping empires and cowed business rivals. "You've had your adventure. Now it's time to return to civilization and your responsibilities." Marcus Henderson stood slightly behind him, his elegant suit out of place in the homey kitchen. His eyes kept straying to Hope, calculating, cold. "My responsibilities?" Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "You mean my duty to marry a man I don't love? To hand over my child to be raised by strangers while I play society wife?" The cane cracked against the floor. "You are a Whitmore. That name carries obligations. I'm a Rylan now." Clara's chin lifted. "Legally, properly, and proudly." Henderson stepped forward, his practiced smile not reaching his eyes. "Come now, my dear. Whatever paper you've managed to procure, whatever story you've concocted, it won't stand. Your father, and I have already spoken to Judge Carlton in Cheyenne. Given your delicate condition when you fled, any decisions made during that time can be easily overturned." Jack straightened, moving to stand beside Clara. "Delicate condition? You mean when you tried to force a grieving widow to marry a man she'd never met?" "Widow?" Jonathan Whitmore's laugh was sharp. "That lumber worker, please. A few secret meetings, a fumbled romance, hardly a marriage." Clara's hands shook, but her voice remained steady. "Thomas and I were married by a minister, Father. I have proof which will be dealt with appropriately." Henderson's tone made the threat clear. "Really, Clara, think of your reputation, your future. I'm willing to overlook this indiscretion. The child can be sent to a good family, raised with proper—" The crash of Jack's fist against the table silenced the room. Even Hope, who had been dozing, startled awake with a cry. "That's enough." Jack's voice was deadly quiet. "You're talking about my daughter, my wife. This is our home, and you're not welcome in it." Jonathan Whitmore's cane rose like a weapon. "Your home? This failing ranch? Don't make me laugh, boy. I've seen the bank records. Your one missed payment. Away from foreclosure." "Perhaps," a new voice said from the doorway, "you should check those records again." Sheriff Davies stepped into the kitchen, followed by Reverend Miller. The minister carried a leather portfolio, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. "You see," Davies continued, "seems the railroad's been looking for a reliable local supplier. Cattle, lumber, the works. And wouldn't you know it, just last week they signed a very profitable contract with the Rylan Ranch. Henderson's face darkened. "I control all railroad contracts in this territory. I never—" "Not your railroad, Mr. Henderson." Clara's smile was sweet as poison. "The Great Northern, your competitors, I believe, they were quite interested when Jack approached them, especially about the lumber rights to the North Valley." Jonathan Whitmore's cane trembled. "You wouldn't dare. That contract was meant for my husband," Clara finished. "Thomas signed the rights to me before he died. Legal and binding. And as Mrs. Jack Rylan, I've chosen to invest them in our ranch." She bounced Hope gently as the baby fussed. "Father, I learned business at your knee. Did you really think I wouldn't use those lessons?" Reverend Miller stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "I have here a marriage certificate dated 6 months ago, witnessed and sealed. I also have young Thomas's original marriage license too. Clara, and his will leaving her his property rights, all filed with the county clerk." He met Henderson's cold stare. "Would you like to challenge the church's records, Mr. Henderson, in front of God and this good community?" The silence stretched, broken only by the steady tick of Jack's father's watch and the soft sounds of Hope settling back to sleep, secure in her mother's arms. Finally, Jonathan Whitmore's cane lowered. For the first time, he really looked at his daughter, not as a business asset, but as a woman grown, baby in her arms, at the quiet strength in her bearing, at the man standing protective beside her. "You've chosen, then?" His voice held something almost like respect. "I chose love, Father, just like Mother taught me to." The cane tapped once more against the floor, softer now. "Come, Henderson, we're finished here. But the contract," Henderson sputtered, "is worth less than my daughter's happiness." Jonathan Whitmore turned to leave, then paused. "Clara Belle, your mother would have been proud." The cane's tapping faded down the hallway, followed by the sound of departing horses. Only then did Clara's composure crack, tears spilling as Jack gathered his family close. The daguerreotype photographer's camera sat ready on its tripod, while Clara arranged her mother's locket just so against her throat. In the polished silver frame beside the camera, a formal Whitmore family portrait served as a stark contrast. Clara at 16, spine straight, smile fixed, her father's hand heavy on her shoulder, her mother's absence a visible void. "Hold still. Now," the photographer instructed, adjusting his equipment. "The young miss especially." Hope, dressed in a christening gown sewn from Clara's wedding dress, squirmed in Jack's arms. His rough hands looked strange against the delicate fabric, but they held their daughter with familiar gentleness. "Almost got it," the photographer muttered. "Just need to—" "Wait." Clara stepped out of position, ignoring the photographers. "Protests." She reached up, loosening Jack's too-tight tie, then mussed his carefully combed hair back to its natural wave. Her fingers lingered against his cheek. "There, now you look like my Jack." His eyes softened as he leaned into her touch. "Thought we were aiming for formal. We're aiming for true." She smoothed Hope's dark curls, so like Thomas's. "All of us exactly as we are." The photographer sighed dramatically. "Very well, but please—" A knock at the studio door interrupted him. Sheriff Davies entered, holding a telegram. "Sorry to disturb," he said, handing the yellow paper to Jack. "But I thought you'd want to see this right away." Jack read it one-handed, his other arm secure around Hope. His expression shifted from concern to surprise. "What is it?" Clara asked. "It's from your father." Jack passed her the telegram. "The Great Northern contract? He's endorsed it, added his own shipping connections to sweeten the deal." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she read. "Stop. Contract approved with additional terms. Stop. Whitmore. Shipping exclusive partner for rail transport. Stop condition. Quarterly family dinners at ranch. Stop. Your mother would have chosen as you did. Stop, Father. Stop. He's trying," Clara whispered. "In his own way." Jack shifted Hope to Clara's arms, then pulled out his father's watch. "Speaking of trying," he opened the case, removing a small photograph tucked inside. His parents on their wedding day. "Think it's time for a new picture in here." a complete family. Clara blinked back tears, remembering the last time she'd posed for a formal portrait, announcing her engagement to Henderson, her smile as false as the pearls at her throat. Now she stood in a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, her daughter, warm against her heart, her husband's hand steady at her waist, and her smile was radiant with truth. "Ready now?" the photographer asked, ducking back under his black cloth. "Ready," Jack answered, but his eyes were on Clara. The camera's flash caught them in natural poses, Jack's protective stance, Clara's gentle confidence, Hope's curious grab for the watch chain. A family built on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than duty. Later, as they drove home through the golden afternoon, Clara studied the Whitmore portrait she'd asked the photographer to copy. "I was so angry at him," she mused, "for trying to make me into someone I wasn't, but maybe he was just trying to give me the life he thought I deserved. And now I have the life I chose, the life I earned." She touched the telegram in her pocket. Maybe he's finally understanding the difference. Jack reined the horses around a bend, the ranch appearing in the distance like a painting. Autumn colors blazing against the prairie sky, smoke rising straight and true from the chimney. Their home. "You know," he said carefully, "those quarterly family dinners, we don't have to—" "Yes, we do." Clara's voice was firm but gentle. "Hope should know her grandfather, know where she comes from." She smiled. "Besides, imagine Father's face when he has to eat at our kitchen table, using Mother's old silver." Jack chuckled. "You're a bit wicked, Mrs. Rylan, and you love me for it, Mr. Rylan." His free hand found hers. "I love you for everything you are, everything you've made me become." Hope cooed from her wrap, one tiny hand reaching for the setting sun. Soon the photographer's portraits would arrive. One for the mantle, one for Jack's watch, one to send to Jonathan Whitmore's study. But the truest picture was here, in this moment. A family riding home together, their future as wide open as the Wyoming sky above them. Old Joe Peterson's Winchester rifle hung above the general store's door, its presence both warning and promise. The weapon had defended the store through 3 decades of frontier life, and now it stood ready again. Though the threat wasn't bandits or wolves, but the 2 well-dressed men asking questions at the bar. "Pinkerton men," Mrs. Peterson whispered, to Clara, who was selecting fabric for Hope's winter clothes. "Not giving up even after your father's visit. Seemed to think Henderson's still got a claim." Clara's hands stilled on the bolt of wool. Through the store window, she could see Jack, talking with Sheriff Davies, their faces grave. 2 weeks had passed since her father's unexpected support, but Henderson's wound pride had proven more dangerous than his business threats. "They're saying terrible things," Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice tight with anger, "about you being unfit, about the marriage being suspect, even suggesting—" She broke off, glancing at Hope sleeping peacefully in her sling. "Suggesting what? That the baby might not be safe here, that a proper investigation into her welfare, the fabric, slipped from Clara's fingers. "They wouldn't dare." "No," came a firm voice from the doorway. "They wouldn't." Sarah Murphy, the telegraph operator's wife, stood with her hands on her hips. Behind her, a cluster of town women had gathered, the banker's wife, the blacksmith's, widow, wives of ranchers and shopkeepers alike, because if they try, Sarah continued, they'll have to go through all of us first. Clara blinked back tears as the women moved into the store, forming a protective circle around her and Hope. These weren't the society ladies she'd grown up with, trading false smiles and sharper gossip. These were women who knew the true measure of love and family. "My Thomas," Mrs. Peterson said quietly, "wasn't my first husband. The first was a proper Boston man, chosen by my parents. But she touched her cheek, where a faint scar remained. "Tom Peterson gave me shelter when I ran. The town protected us until the divorce was final." She smiled grimly. "Some traditions are worth keeping." Outside, more townspeople were gathering. Jack's voice carried through the open door as he addressed the Pinkerton men. "Seems to me," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "that a man who'd tried to force a woman to marry him who'd threatened to take a baby from her mother. Well, that man might find himself unwelcome in these parts. "We represent Mr. Henderson's legal interests," one of the men began, but old Joe Peterson's hand moved significantly toward his rifle. "And we represent community interests," the old shopkeeper said mildly. "Interesting thing about frontier law. Out here, a community's word carries more weight than any city paper." The second Pinkerton man stepped forward. "We have documentation suggesting the marriage, Reverend Miller's voice cut in, was performed by me, witnessed by God and this community, and recorded proper in the county books." He pulled out his Bible. "Would you like to swear on this that you know different?" Clara moved to the store's doorway, the other women flanking her protectively. Hope stirred and blinked up at her mother with Thomas's dark eyes, completely at peace in her mother's arms. "Gentlemen," Clara said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street, "I suggest you tell Mr. Henderson that his interest, while noted, is unwelcome. I am exactly where I choose to be, with the family I choose to have. And if he persists," Sheriff Davies added, his badge catching the sunlight, "he might find himself facing questions about attempting to separate a legal family, questions that could interest newspapers far beyond our little town." The Pinkerton men exchanged glances. They were used to intimidating isolated targets, not facing united communities. Finally, the senior agent touched his hat. "We'll convey your position to our client." As they mounted their horses to leave, old Joe Peterson called out, "Mind you tell him about the rifle too. Been in my family 3 generations, never missed its mark yet." The town watched the agents ride away, dust settling in their wake. Only then did Clara's composure crack. Jack was there instantly, gathering her and Hope close. "It's really over?" she whispered against his chest. "It was over the moment you chose us," he murmured back. The rest was just other folks catching up to that truth. Around them, the community began to disperse, women returning to their shops and homes, men to their work. But something had shifted, something permanent. The rifle above the store door would stay ready, the community's watch would remain alert. And Clara finally understood what Jack had meant about frontier justice being more about hearts than laws. Hope reached up, catching a lock of her mother's hair, and Clara laughed through her tears. Here, surrounded by honest love and steadfast hearts, she was more wealthy than she'd ever been in her father's mansion. The tiny leather boots sat on the mantelpiece, a milestone marked in miniature. Jack had worked the soft leather by lamplight for weeks, carefully crafting Hope's first pair of walking shoes, while Clara sewed tiny dresses, and the winter wind howled outside their warm kitchen. "She's growing so fast," Clara mused, watching. Hope pulled herself up using the quilt-draped armchair, her determination pure Whitmore, her grin pure Thomas. At 10 months old, their daughter was a perfect blend of past and present heritage and hope. "Strong legs," Jack observed proudly, as Hope wobbled but stayed standing. "Going to be riding before we know it." "Don't rush her," Clara laughed, but her eyes were soft as she watched Jack hover nearby, ready to catch their daughter if she fell. These quiet evening moments had become precious routine. Hope practicing her newfound skills while Jack and Clara completed the day's tasks together, moving around each other with the easy grace of hearts grown comfortable. The railroad contract had transformed the ranch. New cattle filled the pastures, and the lumber operation in the North Valley employed half the young men in town. Clara's business acumen combined with Jack's ranching knowledge had created something neither could have managed alone. "Papa," Hope demanded, reaching for Jack with unwavering confidence that he would answer her call. He scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her dark curls. "Ready to try your new boots, little lady?" Clara retrieved the shoes from the mantel, running her finger over the carefully tooled designs. Tiny flowers matching the ones on her cradle, and a small heart on each sole. "They're beautiful, Jack. Like something from a fairy tale. Learned from watching father make them for the local children." Jack settled Hope on his knee, while Clara slipped the soft boots onto their daughter's sturdy legs. "He always said a child's first step should be made in love." Hope kicked her feet, admiring the new boots with serious concentration. Then, with the suddenness of a baby's decision, she squirmed to be put down. "What do you think, precious girl?" Clara knelt on the floor, arms outstretched. "Ready to walk to Mama?" Jack set Hope carefully on her feet, supporting her while she found her balance. The boots seemed to give her new confidence, or perhaps it was simply time, that mysterious force that transformed babies into children while parents watched in wonder. Hope stood for a moment, swaying slightly, then took one determined step toward Clara, then another. Jack's hands hovered but didn't touch as their daughter made her wobbly way across the kitchen floor. 3 steps, 4, 5. Clara's eyes filled with tears as Hope reached her, tumbling into her mother's arms with a triumphant laugh. "Oh my, darling, you clever, wonderful girl, just like her mama," Jack said, his own voice rough with emotion, brave and strong. And a knock at the door interrupted the moment. Clara scooped Hope up instinctively, but Jack's easy movement to answer. It showed how much had changed. No more fear. No more looking over their shoulders. Jonathan Whitmore stood on the porch, wool coat dusted with snow, his silver-headed cane now more support than symbol. "I hope I'm not too late for dinner," he said formally. The train was delayed. "By weather. Right on time, Father." Clara's smile was genuine as she shifted Hope to her hip. "Look who's walking in the boots Jack made her." Something softened in Jonathan's stern face as Hope reached for him with grabby hands, clearly expecting her grandfather to melt, as he always did. "Walking already? But she's barely—" He broke off as Clara transferred Hope to his arms, the baby immediately tugging at his watch chain. "They grow fast," Jack said, helping his father-in-law out of his coat, "especially when they're loved." The older man bounced Hope gently, a gesture that would have shocked Philadelphia society. "Rather like dreams," he said quietly, "and families." He drew a thick envelope from his pocket. "Speaking of which, I've brought the final contracts for the spring expansion. If you're still interested in adding the Morrison place to the ranch." Clara exchanged a glance with Jack, joy bubbling up. They'd been hoping to buy the neighboring property, but hadn't quite had the capital. "Father, you didn't have to consider it an investment," Jonathan said gruffly. "In my granddaughter's future," his voice softened. "And an apology, perhaps, for not understanding sooner what truly matters." Hope chose that moment to plant a sticky kiss on her grandfather's cheek, making him laugh. A real laugh, one Clara hadn't heard since her mother died. "Come on," Jack said, guiding them toward the kitchen where savory smells promised Clara's now perfect pot roast. "Dinner's getting cold." Clara paused in the doorway, watching her father settle at their table with Hope on his knee, Jack carrying. In steaming dishes, the boots on the mantel marking one perfect moment in a life that had grown richer than any society fortune could provide. "Some journeys," she thought, taking her place at the table, "led you exactly where you were meant to be. All along, even if you had to run away to find your way home." The new ranch sign gleamed in the spring sunshine. Rylan Family Ranch, EST 1862. Jack had carved it from a single piece of aged oak, each letter deep and sure, with delicate wildflowers blooming along the borders. The same flowers that grew in his mother's meadow, the same ones he'd carved on Hope's cradle. "It's perfect," Clara said, standing back to admire his work. 1 year had passed since she'd first hidden in his wagon, and the changes were visible everywhere, in the fresh-painted barn, the thriving garden, the new fence lines stretching toward the Morrison place. But more than that, the changes showed in them. Her hands were no longer soft, but capable and sure as she gathered eggs and helped with calving. Jack's shoulders stood straighter, the weight of debt replaced by the proud responsibility of growing prosperity. And Hope, now walking steadily in her beloved boots, had become the heart of not just their family, but the whole community. "Almost perfect," Jack corrected, lifting the sign carefully. "Still needs its final touch." He handed Clara a small carving. Knife, handle worn smooth by generations of Rylan hands. "Your turn." Clara's breath caught as she understood. Slowly, carefully, she carved the last piece, a small heart, sheltered within the final flourish of flowers. Inside, she added 3 tiny initials, JCH. "Now it's perfect," she whispered. The sound of hooves made them turn. Sheriff Davies rode up, leading a string of new horses, part of their expanding business ventures. "Fine-looking sign," he called out, dismounting. "Fine-looking place altogether. Your father's latest investment's paying off, Clara." "Our investment," she corrected. The railroad contract had indeed flourished under the combined forces of Whitmore shipping connections and Rylan ranching expertise, though I never thought I'd see father taking such pride in cattle futures. "Speaking of pride," Davies grinned, "wait till you hear the latest from town. Henderson's railroad's losing contracts left and right. Seems folks prefer doing business with companies that respect family values." Jack's arm slipped around Clara's waist. "Funny how that works. Mama, Papa." Hope's voice carried across the yard as she toddled toward them, Mrs. Peterson following with an indulgent smile. The old shopkeeper's wife had become Hope's devoted grandmother by choice, watching her whenever ranch work required both parents' attention. "Land sakes," Mrs. Peterson called out, "but that child's got her mama's determination, insisted on picking flowers for the new sign herself." She held up Hope's slightly crushed bouquet of meadow blooms. "Just like her mother," Jack murmured, loud enough for only Clara to hear, "knowing exactly what a home needs." Clara watched their daughter present her flowers with serious ceremony, remembered another time she'd offered Jack flowers, the first Sunday she'd attended church as his wife, nervous about facing the town's judgment. She'd gathered a similar bouquet for the altar, and the simple act had somehow given her courage. "You've done your parents proud, Jack," Davies said quietly, looking at the sign. "Built something real here, something that'll last." "Built it together," Jack corrected, squeezing Clara's hand. "All of us." The sheriff tipped his hat, leading the horses toward the barn, while Mrs. Peterson scooped up Hope for her afternoon nap, leaving Jack and Clara alone with their new sign. "Ready?" Jack asked, lifting it. Clara nodded, touching the carved heart once more. Together they mounted the sign at the ranch entrance, its letters catching the sun like promises kept. "I was so scared that night," Clara admitted, watching the shadow of their sign fall across the road where she'd first arrived. "Hiding in your wagon, feeling Hope kick, wondering if I was being brave or just foolish." "Brave," Jack said firmly. "Brave enough to trust a stranger, brave enough to choose love over security." He smiled. "Brave enough to learn to milk a cow," Clara laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Brave enough to love again," she added softly. "Even though I thought that, and part of my heart died with Thomas." "He'd be proud of you too," Jack said, "of how you've honored his memory while building something new, of how you're raising his daughter to be as strong and true as her mama." A meadowlark called from the flowering grass, its song bright with spring promises. Clara thought of all the changes 1 year had brought. Her father's gradual softening, the community's fierce embrace, the way love could expand to hold both memory and new joy. "Jack," she said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've suspected for a few weeks now." He turned to her, eyes questioning. "The sign might need updating again soon," she said, taking his hand and pressing it gently against her stomach. "The Rylan family is expanding." Joy blazed across his face like sunrise. "Clara, are you sure?" She nodded, happy tears spilling. "Hope's going to be a big sister, and this little one," she touched the carved heart on the sign, "this one will be all Rylan, born from love that chose us both." Jack gathered her close, his kiss tasting of joy and promise and forever. Above them, the new sign cast its shadow like a blessing, marking not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would stretch far beyond their own time, a legacy built on trust, courage, and the profound truth that family was something you could both inherit and choose. The ruby from Clara's mother's ring caught the sunset like a drop of remembered love, now reborn as her wedding band to Jack. The town's jeweler had reshaped it perfectly, the stone that had once symbolized her gilded cage now curved gracefully around her finger, embracing rather than confining. Tell me the story again, Mama, Hope begged, curled in Clara's lap on the porch swing. At nearly 2, their daughter had her father's gentle heart and her mother's curiosity, with Thomas's dark curls tumbling wild around her face. Clara shifted carefully, her second pregnancy, rounding her middle more prominently than her first. Jack sat beside them, his hand resting protectively over where their son kicked steadily. Which story, precious? About the brave lumberman who loved your mama enough to marry her in secret, or about the kind rancher who opened his heart and home to 2 lost souls on a stormy night? Both, Hope declared. They're really the same story, aren't they? About love being stronger than fear? Jack chuckled. When did you get so wise, little one? Grandfather says I get it from grandmother. Catherine? Hope touched the ruby ring with careful fingers. This was hers first, wasn't it? Clara nodded, remembering her mother's last words. Love isn't about possession, dear heart. It's about setting each other free to fly, then choosing to fly together. And now it's yours and Papa's, Hope continued, because you chose each other. Just like Thomas chose you, and you chose me, and we all chose the ranch, and we choose each other every day, Jack finished, dropping a kiss on Hope's curls. That's what makes it precious. The evening light painted the ranch in soft gold, highlighting all they'd built together. The garden bloomed with late summer abundance. The new barn stood proud against the sky, and the freshly painted house gleamed like a welcome. Through the open windows, they could smell Mrs. Peterson's apple pie cooling in their kitchen. She'd insisted on baking for their small anniversary celebration. Papa? Hope's voice was thoughtful. Will you tell me about the night Mama came? The real story, not the pretend one we tell visitors. Jack's eyes met Clara's over their daughter's head. The real story, he said slowly, is about courage. About your mama being brave enough to trust a stranger because her heart told her it was right. About how sometimes the biggest acts of love look like the smallest kindnesses. Like offering shelter from a storm, Hope asked. Like delivering a baby, Clara added softly. Like carving a cradle or teaching someone to milk a cow, or standing together against the whole world. Like family, Hope declared with certainty. Just like family, Jack agreed. He touched the ruby ring, its deep red matching the sunset. You know, your mama offered me this ring for safekeeping the night you were born. Said it was a reminder that she chose love over duty. And now it's a reminder that duty and love can be the same thing, Clara finished. When they're chosen. Freely, Hope sat up suddenly. Listen, horses! The sound of approaching riders made them turn. Jonathan Whitmore led the small party, his formal posture softened by time and love. Behind him rode Sarah Murphy and her husband, the sheriff and his wife, and various other townspeople who'd become more than neighbors. They were the family that choice and circumstance had woven together as surely as blood. Right on time, Jack said, helping Clara up. Wouldn't be an anniversary celebration without the whole family. Clara squeezed his hand, remembering another sunset when she'd hidden in his wagon, desperate and afraid. Now she stood on her own porch, surrounded by love that had been both inherited and earned, watching her father dismount to sweep Hope into his arms while Mrs. Peterson called everyone in to dinner. "Happy anniversary, my love," Jack murmured. His hand warm against her back, Clara touched her mother's ruby, now a symbol of promises kept and love freely given. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what would have happened if you'd taken a different route home that night, if you checked your wagon earlier or later?" "Never," Jack said firmly. "Some things are meant to be, even if we have to choose them 1,000 times before they're truly ours." Hope ran back to them, taking both their hands. "Come on. Grandfather says we can't cut the pie until we're all inside, and I helped Mrs. Peterson make it special." Clara laughed, letting her daughter pull them toward the warmth and light of their kitchen, where family, born and chosen, past and present, waited to celebrate love in all its forms. The ruby ring caught the last ray of sunset as they stepped. Inside, its light a benediction on the life they'd built together, one brave choice at a time.